The smoke was still rising from the Persian Gulf coast when the fracture became impossible to ignore. A crack had appeared in the alliance between Washington and Tel Aviv, not from enemy fire but from a Truth Social post. It was Wednesday evening and the world was watching. Israel had just struck the South Pars gas field in southern Iran, a massive industrial complex sitting on the world's largest known reserve of natural gas. The attack was bold, it was calculated, and according to President Donald Trump, it was done entirely without his knowledge. Israel, out of anger for what has taken place in the Middle East, has violently lashed out at a major facility known as South Pars gas field in Iran. Trump wrote in a furious post on Truth Social, declaring he had no prior knowledge of the strike. The words landed like a second explosion across diplomatic channels worldwide. An American president in the middle of a joint war with Israel against Iran, a war that began on February 28th, was publicly disowning his closest military partner. South Pars holds an estimated reservoir that sits at the heart of Iran's domestic energy supply, and related oil and petrochemical assets were also struck at Asaluye in southern Iran. This was not a small symbolic gesture. This was a knife driven into Iran's economic spine. The strike was the first time Israel had targeted Iranian natural gas production infrastructure since the conflict began on February 28th. For nearly 3 weeks prior, both American and Israeli forces had maintained a calculated restraint around energy targets, wary of sending already fragile global oil markets into full collapse. That restraint ended on Wednesday. Energy prices were already rising sharply because the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz meant oil and gas that had already been produced could not reach its customers on time. The South Pars strike poured fuel on that fire. Oil hit $115 per barrel, and gas on European markets surged by 30%. Global stock markets cratered. Japan's Nikkei 225 fell 3.38%, European indexes approached losses of 2%, and the S&P 500 closed down 1.36%. Within hours of the Israeli strike, Tehran moved. Iran's Revolutionary Guard, which had already threatened to target oil and gas facilities across the Gulf, made good on its warning. Iran fired ballistic missiles at Qatar's Ras Laffan industrial city, one of the world's largest liquefied natural gas export terminals, causing what Qatar Energy described as extensive damage, requiring emergency response teams to contain fires at the site. No casualties were immediately reported, but the economic damage was severe. Ras Laffan is not just Qatar's facility, it processes about a fifth of the global gas supply. The attack on Qatar drew an immediate and furious response from Doha. Qatar's foreign ministry declared the Iranian embassy's military attachés and their staff persona non grata, ordering them to leave the country within 24 hours. The Gulf state, which also hosts the largest American military base in the region, was now standing squarely in the middle of a war it had not started and had not wanted. Trump moved quickly to separate Qatar from any association with Israel's strike. He wrote that Qatar was in no way, shape, or form involved with it, nor did it have any idea that it was going to happen. He then issued a direct threat to Tehran. If Iran continued attacking Qatar's energy facilities, the United States would massively blow up the entirety of the South Pars gas field at an amount of strength and power that Iran has never seen or witnessed before. But the story behind Trump's fury was more complicated than his post suggested. Axios reported that senior Israeli and U.S. officials were aware of the strike in advance and had even approved it, aiming to sever an economic pipeline for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The Wall Street Journal carried a similar report. One Israeli official told CNN the strike was carried out in coordination with the United States. The White House did not immediately address those claims. What was clear, regardless of who knew what beforehand, was that Trump had made a public show of distance from Israel, a political move as much as a diplomatic one. Trump later confirmed he had instructed Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to stop attacks on Iranian oil and gas facilities, drawing a visible line that had not existed before in this conflict. The move signaled that the two allies, while still fighting the same enemy, were no longer fully aligned on how that fight should be conducted. Iran was not finished. On Thursday, Iran attacked the world's biggest liquefied natural gas complex in Qatar again, targeted gas facilities in the United Arab Emirates, fired missiles, and launched drones at a Saudi Arabian oil refinery and struck 2 Kuwaiti gas units. It was a sweeping regional strike, punishing not just Qatar, but every Gulf neighbor that sat within range. UAE authorities said missiles targeting the Habshan gas facility and Bab Field were intercepted, but falling debris forced the facilities to shut down. Kuwait Petroleum Corp confirmed drone attacks on units at its Mina al-Ahmadi and Mina Abdullah refineries. Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian warned that the attacks on Iran's energy infrastructure would complicate the situation and could have uncontrollable consequences, the scope of which could engulf the entire world. French President Emmanuel Macron, following phone calls with the Emir of Qatar and Trump, called for an immediate halt to strikes targeting civilian infrastructure, including energy and water supply facilities. German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul warned of a crisis of the gravest order if global supply chains continued to be disrupted. Meanwhile, the human cost of nearly 3 weeks of war continued to mount. More than 3,000 people had been killed in Iran since the U.S.-Israeli attacks began, according to the U.S.-based Iran human rights group HRANA. In Lebanon, authorities reported 900 killed and 800,000 forced to flee their homes. A senior Iranian security source told CNN that Tehran was confident that Trump was and is aware of the details of the attacks on energy infrastructure, and warned that the Strait of Hormuz will not return to pre-war conditions. The intelligence picture on the ground was equally grim for Washington. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard told senators that while Iran's leadership appeared to be largely degraded, the regime appears to be intact. 3 weeks of bombing had not broken the government in Tehran. With 2,200 U.S. Marines aboard the USS Tripoli, heading from Japan, and scheduled to arrive in the Middle East within days, the signs pointed not toward a closing chapter, but toward a deepening one. What started as a war between the United States, Israel, and Iran had become something far wider. The Gulf was burning. Allies were arguing, markets were collapsing, and the largest natural gas field on Earth had become the new front line of a conflict that nobody, not even the men who started it, could fully control. The fires at Ras Laffan were still burning. The smoke from South Pars had not cleared. And somewhere between Washington and Tel Aviv, a question hung in the air that no one had yet answered. Who exactly was in charge of this war?